This is on, it's not a classic car selection, it's the cars that made us. So we're going to talk about the cars that we have owned. I will be starting off with all the cars that I've owned and how they made us. And I started to learn to drive in a 1983 Fiat Panda, which was an absolute pile of rubbish. It rusted from the bottom up. There were holes in the footwell. There were holes in the door. We replaced one of the doors. It was a red car with an orange door that we found at a scrap dealer's. The doors literally rusted from the bottom up. By the time we sold the car, there was a gap like this under the driver's side, a hole like this under the footwell, and the car had only done 40,000 miles. They just rusted from the outside in, and then there's of course
outside, inside.
Well, there's a famous thing when they started to galvanise the outside of the Fiat Pandas to stop them rusting. My cousin had one of these, and I said, "Was it any good?" She said, "No, it rusted from the inside out because as soon as the water ingressed on the inside, that's where it started to rust." But the first car that I bought with my own money, I'd previously driven an old Fiat. I'd driven my mother's Fiesta of the vintage that I believe that you had, but I went out and bought this. It was a look at it. 1980. This is not the car, but this is the same spec and the same colour.
Yes.
A 1987 Citroen AX 10 RE. It wasn't just the R; it was the RE.
Was the 10 the amount of horsepower it had?
It was not far off. I just looked this up the other day. I was shocked at how. I think it had about 60 HP.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It was a peppy engine, 1987 Citroen AX 10 RE, 32 on the clock. It had been left in a garage in Edinburgh for 3 years and not driven. I got it for £1,600 in 1995. I drove it for 3 years. I put 60,000 miles on the clock. I learned to drive in this car. I drove it from Nottingham every week. I drove all over the Cotswolds. I once went from Stratford-upon-Avon to Halifax, crossed the Pennines to Manchester, and back to Stratford-upon-Avon in a weekend. This only had a 954cc engine. I drove it to Brussels. I drove it down to Felixstowe, caught a ferry with this car, drove all the way to Belgium with this little monster. It only broke down on me once in 3-4 years that I owned it, and that was an ignition module failure.
Oh, okay.
Nothing else went on it. You couldn't go over 80 miles an hour, though, because it would vibrate. I had a tape deck, and if you did AC1, it made every song sounded like Belinda Carlisle. You know, oh, baby, do you know what it's worth?
It's not funny.
Everything. It wasn't funny, especially when I was trying to listen to Motorhead. Lemmy sounded like Belinda Carlisle. And I sold it to a bloke who had a TVR and needed a small, reliable car for the winter. All this was plastic, and the back hatch was plastic because it was a hatchback. But there was a piece of glass, and then the bottom of the car wasn't metal; it was blue plastic. If you slammed it too hard, you could snap it.
At 82 miles an hour, did the panels just sort of like peeling off?
It did start to look like the DeLorean when it was going through. Things were moving around. And as I just talked to you before the show, I was reminded it came with no cigarette lighter. I think I had to have the 10, the 11 RE, not the 10 RE. Yeah, and it didn't. This actually was a better version of mine. This looks like it's got alloys. Mine had steel hubcaps and plastic hubcaps that I put over the top that I was always losing and finding in ditches when I went back from the pub.
On the side of the road.
Yeah, on the side of the road, some kind old bloke with a dog. I'll put that there by that tree, and then I'd come along and find it. It was an all right little car. It was a peppy engine. This was almost the last era Citroen made decent cars because it didn't let me down. It didn't fall to bits. My wife hated it. She was my girlfriend at the time, and she used to drive it and hated that car.